Page number 55. When the roll is called up yonder. Stand with me, please, as we sing page number 55. When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound and time shall be no more, and the holy priest eternal bright and fair, when the Savior shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. On the bright and cloudless morning, when the dead in Christ shall rise, and the glory of His resurrection share, when His chosen ones shall gather to the home beyond the skies, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. On the last, let us labor for the Master from the dawn till setting sun. Let us talk of all His wondrous love and care. Then when all of life is over and our work on earth is done, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there.
Amen. That's a good thought, isn't it?
Amen.
Amen. That's what it's all about. Open up prayer tonight at this time. Father, once again tonight, thank you so much for our church. Father, bless them into our services tonight as we sing, as we hear what you have us to hear from your word. Father, help us to have open ears, open hearts to hear you speak tonight. In Jesus' name we ask all these things. Amen. You can be seated.
Page number 65. Page number 65. Just over in the glory land. Page number 65. I'm a home prepared where the saints abide, just over in the glory land. And I long to be by my Savior's side, just over in the glory land. Just over in the glory land, I'll join and the angels play. Just over in the glory land. 396. Page number 396. So little time. So little time, the harvest will be over. Our reaping done, we reapers take it home. Report our word to Jesus, Lord of harvest, and hope will smile, and then he'll say, well done. Today we reap this golden harvest. Today is given us the souls to win. Oh, then to save some dear ones from the burning. Today we'll go to bring some singing. Let's sing verse number 2. How many times I should have strongly pleaded, I often did, but feel strictly warned. The Spirit moved, all night I pled for Jesus. The rain is falling, lost ones not reborn. Today we reap this golden harvest. Today is given us our souls to win. Oh, then to save some dear ones from the burning. Today we'll go to bring some singing. We'll sing verse number 4 for the last. A day of pleasure or a feast of friendship, a house or car, or garments fair or fame, will all be trashed when souls are brought to heaven, and then how sad to face the slander's blame. Today we reap amidst the golden harvest. Today is given us all souls to win. Oh, then to save some dear ones from the burning. Today we'll go to bring some singing.
All right, a couple things to announce. That was off on our dates in the bulletin. I had mentioned that the ladies' conference was going to be next weekend. It is 2 weeks. It is a week from next weekend, and so that's going to be the 17th through the 19th. If you're into that, and see my wife, if you would please, on that down in St. Charles, Missouri. We are going to take up a blessing offering the first week in November for a missionary who is at home from the field, who is in dire need. And so keep that in mind, if you would. I'll have a name out on that for you folks here this week. That's all that I'm going to announce tonight. We are going to have a five-minute business meeting after our services tonight. If you can hang around for that, it'll take probably 5 minutes at the most. And so keep that in mind, if you would. As the ushers come for the offering tonight, and ask us to go ahead and pray for it and for our needs at this time. Father, once again tonight, thank you so much for who you are, Father, and for your goodness to us as your children. Bless, please, our offering nothing meets our needs here at the church, Father. We have folks up tonight that are home ill, and I pray that each need, please, that each one has, and encourage them tonight as well. And bless the offering that meets our needs here, please, as a church. And as always, Father, you bless those in turn who can give. In Christ's name we ask. Amen.
Page number 115 for the last hymn. page number 115. No one ever cared for me like Jesus. Stand with me, please, as we sing page number 115. I would love to tell you what I think of Jesus, since I found in him the friends so strong and true. I would tell you how he changed my life completely. He did something that no other friend could do. No one ever cared for me like Jesus. There's no other friend so kind as he. No one else could take the sin and darkness from me. Oh, how much he cared for me. Verse number 2. All my life was full of sin when Jesus found me. All my heart was full of misery and woe. Jesus placed his strong and loving arms about me, and he led me in the way I ought to go. No one ever cared for me like Jesus. There's no other friend so kind as he. No one else could take the sin and darkness from me. Oh, how much he cared for me. On verse number 3. Every day he comes to me with new assurance. More and more I understand his words of love. But I'll never know just why he came to save me, till someday I see his blessed face above. No one ever cared for me like Jesus. There's no other friend so kind as he. No one else could take the sin and darkness from me. Oh, how much he cares for me. Thank you. You may be seated.
If you ever have the opportunity to pull up the story of the man who wrote that song, Brother Jackson told me that he had the honor and privilege when he was in Bible school of pushing him around in his wheelchair as he was up in years. What an honor that was, I'm sure. Dad had an album in his office for a long time. I'm not sure if he has it still. Somebody gave him an old console record player. Remember those days that have a slide up on top, they have speakers on the side. It's kind of like an end table. He had one of those that person gave to him, and in the corner he had a bunch of old albums. And he had an album that had Dr. Robertson singing. If you've never heard him sing before, he was almost as good of a singer as he was a preacher. He had an amazing voice. I think Dad told me one time that he could hold a note for a minute. He said he could hold a note for a minute, just a perfect pitch. He had folks who sang in his church on that album. And then on the other side, he had the man who wrote that song, Dr. Weigel was his name, and I believe he was an evangelist. And he came home from a meeting. If I get this right, he came home from a meeting and found a note on the table that his wife had written. That she said, this life isn't for me, and so it's either you choose me or God's call. And she had left him, and so he was in his grief. And folks, if you heard him tell the story, it's just that when he speaks, it's from his heart. It's like there's a tear in his voice. And as he told the story, he said, I didn't know what to do. He said, I didn't have a friend in the world. I didn't know what I was going to do. I was heartbroken. And he said, I was sitting there at the table. And he said, I had this in my hand. And I said, I didn't know what to do. And he said, then I thought about the Lord. And then he said he pulled out a piece of paper. And he just penned down the words to that song, No One Ever Cared for Me Like Jesus. And he said that friend to him, that song to him had carried him through many things of his life. I heard a sermon Dr. Robertson preached about how he died, and that was amazing too. I was heading up to Omaha with Luke to eat a meal with my parents on Thanksgiving. I guess it's been 2 years ago now, And so we were heading on the road, and the person would give me tapes of sermons. I popped one in of Dr. Robertson, and he was telling the story of Dr. Weigel, how God called him home. And I promise you, folks, it was on Thanksgiving Day, and it was gorgeous to be outside, and I was brushing away tears in the car, thinking, man, this guy was a giant of the faith. He said that he said he was up in his 90s, and he went to Dr. Robertson and said and asked him if he could pray that God would allow him to live to be 100. And so he said, I can do that. And so, no, he was in his 80s when that happened. And so I guess he got up to around 90s or so, and he walked into Dr. Robertson's office, and he said, change my mind. He said, I want you to pray that God calls me home sooner. And he said, Dr. Weigel, he said, I can't do that. And he said, well, he said, can you do it for me? Can you just pray for God's will? He said, I can't do that. So he prayed, and he said he was as healthy as could be for his age. And he said one day Dr. Robertson got a call from the nurses in the hospital and said, Dr. Weigel's here. He checked himself into the hospital, and he says he's sick, but he's not sick. He said he's not coming home from the hospital. And so Dr. Robertson said he went and saw him in the hospital and said, what are you doing here? And he said I'm going home I'm going home. And he said, but Dr. Weigel, he said, all the nurses were asking what's going on because you're not sick. He said, I know I'm not. He said, God told me I'm going home soon. He said, I'm not going back home from the hospital. And so Dr. Robertson said, okay. So he said a word of prayer for him there at the hospital, and he left. And he said, I believe if I'm getting this right. He said the next day he came back. He visited him again. He said, he was as healthy as could be. He said, I don't get why you're here. He said, I'm going home. He said, God told me I'm going home. And it was that day, I believe, that he fell asleep in his room, and God took him home. And I thought, man, that's an amazing testimony. Is it not? When I heard that story, and I was just pushing back tears. I thought, man, God is so good. Turn this, if you went over to 1 Samuel tonight, 1 Samuel 13. And I hope our message tonight is a help and a lesson to you as it was here this week. But it is entitled "How to Be a Man or a Person After God's Own Heart." How to be a man or a person after God's own heart. 1 Samuel 13, if you would tonight. 1 Samuel 13 and verse number 14. If you would, talking about David here, of course, he says, but now thy kingdom shall not continue, but the Lord hath sought out a man after his own heart, David, of course, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord had commanded thee. Turn, if you would, over to 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 15. 1 Kings chapter 15, there are 3 times in Scriptures that David is mentioned as a man after God's own heart. 1 Kings chapter 15, verse number 3 tonight. And he walked in all the sins of his father which he had done before him, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God as the heart of David his father. Turn, if you would, over to the book of Acts now. So even in the New Testament, Acts chapter 13 tonight. Acts chapter 13 and verse number 22. Acts chapter 13 and verse number 22 says, and when he had removed him, he raised up unto them David to be their king, to whom also he gave testimony. And he said, I have found David the son of Jesse, a man after mine own heart, which shall fulfill all my will. I have tonight 3 points that I want us all to go home with here tonight. To be a man after God's own heart. But before I start off, I want to ask you, is this even important to you? Is this even important to you? Is this a desire in your heart that you long to be a man that is after God's own heart, that is in tune with Him? I put down just a couple of words tonight that kind of explain what it means to be a man after God's own heart. And our first word is this: use. Use. God used him in an awesome way, and He does still in His writings. There is not a person here tonight who is a believer who does not love the book of Psalms. It's amazing how the book of Psalms, oftentimes when we're encouraged, when we're discouraged, when we are going through a trial or a battle or have a need, oftentimes we run to Psalms, and it is awesome to me how oftentimes the Psalms calm us down. It is awesome to me oftentimes how the Psalms soothe our soul. Oftentimes we have tears in our eyes. Oftentimes we'll have tears in our heart, and we'll read through the psalm, and we will get done with the psalm and say, you know what, it's going to be okay. God is in charge. God's on His throne. God hears me here. David, God's going to come through. God is in charge of all the earth, and the earth is His throne. Heaven is His footstool. God knows all about me. God knows my past. God knows. David is the man who God used to write down all these psalms. What a blessing they are to us. And let me ask you tonight, is there a longing in your heart for God to use you in some way or use? If you don't want God to use you, then our message tonight isn't for you. But it's for those who say, you know what, I just long for God to use me to be a help and a blessing in some way. Put this down if you would next. Relationship. Relationship. Let me ask you tonight, is it important to you at all that you have a relationship, a one-on-one with Almighty God? Now folks, let that sink in for a moment, that you can have a one-on-one relationship. You can talk to Him. He can speak to you. He can use you and guide you. You can have a one-on-one with Almighty God. Amen. David, I believe, had that, and God called him. He said, this man is a man after my own heart. He has a relationship. He cares about me. I care about him, and I use him greatly. I have 3 words tonight that I want us all to go home with. Our first word is this: humility. Humility. Turn your foot over to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. We are in a world tonight that, of course, it is obvious. It is nothing new to us tonight. But we are in a world tonight that is filled up with self. Me, I, mine. Look at all these things that I can do, what I've done, what I'm going to do. All you have to do is just open up a computer or a phone or a tablet and go on any of the medias that are out there, and they will be filled up with self. Yes. Look at me, look how awesome I am, look how cool I am, look how unbelievable I am, look how strong, look how smart, look how talented. Folks, we are so filled up with self, and folks, I'm talking tonight a lot of times about preachers. It is, folks, I have stopped going online and to look at, I don't have Twitter, I don't have Instagram, I don't have Facebook, I don't have any of this stuff. I'm not opposed to it. I don't have it personally. And I've had a time in life that I've gone on there when I've been bored to say, hey, what's going on with this person I know? We're over here in this church of ministry. And almost every single time I have turned it off, and I have been upset and appalled. And I think to myself, where is the humility that these people have that say that they're preachers? It is amazing to me how we are filled up with self, and we wonder why God is nowhere around us. It could be tonight because we are filled up to the brim with ourselves. Humility. Turn if you go over to 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel 17 and verse number 33, if you would. And Saul said to David, thou art not able to go up against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and a man of war, and he a man of war from his youth. I love David's answer. And David said to Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took the lamb out of the flock, and I went after him, and I smote him, delivered him it out of his mouth, and he rose against me, and I caught him by his beard, and I smote him and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. And if you notice here at the end, seeing he had defied the armies of the living God, David said, moreover, notice if you would, this is the groundwork of his life. The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, and out of the paw of the bear, He will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to him, of course, go, and the Lord be with thee. Folks, I had a thought this week. What if this happened this year? And it was a young man in the church. And again tonight, I'm not harping on media at all, but what if this man in the church had Instagram, had Twitter, had Facebook, had all these things? Just what if it was him who
killed the giant, a Goliath, man, it would, in our terms that we use, it would go viral. And unless it was a person who was purposely humble, they would say, look at all that I have done, look what I accomplished, look how good I am, look how strong I am, look at what I did, I've done this, I've done that, man, I am the king, I'm all these things. And I thought to myself, whatever happened to good old-fashioned humility? Notice if you went over in 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel 22. And verse number 2, he says here, and he said, the Lord is my rock, the Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. The God of my rock, in him will I trust, he is my shield. In 4, he says, I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from our enemies. Turn your foot over to Psalm. Psalm chapter 18. Psalm chapter 18 and verse number 2. I could use many psalms on this tonight. Psalm chapter 18, verse number 1. He says, I will love thee, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my buckler, and the horn of my salvation, and my high tower. I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from mine enemies. The Lord, he's my help. I call upon him. He comes through. He helps me. It's all because of him that I am what I am. All that I am comes from God, and he is behind all that I do. He helps in all that I do. He is my help and my strength and the rock of my salvation. Let me ask you tonight, who is God to you? Who is God to you, folks? I am concerned tonight if in our Christianity, if God is just a little pet or a thing that we have on the back burner of the stove, and he's just there on Sunday, and he's just there occasionally when we have to have him. But I wonder tonight if God is all that we have, and he's all that we need, and in trouble I call upon him, and he comes through, and I just have a strong relationship and confidence in Almighty God, and we have put ourselves under God. Folks, I promise us tonight, if I was to ask a poll in our average church, if we truly submit to God, most people would say, yes, I do, Pastor. I submit to God. I humble myself under him. But in reality, I ask myself, do we honestly, really? Listen, folks, tonight, how long has it been? How long has it been since you have said, not my will, but thine? How long has it been since you have called upon him every day? In needs and in trials? How long has it been since you have just put yourself under his mighty hand? Humility. And when God does bless, you just say, praise the Lord. Amen. He helped me. Hey, he was the one. Hey, had it not been the Lord had been on our side, like I preached on this morning. Now may Israel say, had it not been that the Lord had been on our side. Folks, I believe with all my heart that he had put himself under God's almighty hand. Good old-fashioned humility. Put this down next to us if you would tonight. And this is a big one. Obedience. Obedience. I don't have time tonight to go into the whole story in Scripture, all of us know the stories of King David, but I thought of about 4 big ones in his life as he was called to be the king. He was the youngest of all the boys. He was out in the field. He's called in. He hits his knees. He is an anointed king of Israel. And he just, folks, I'm sure in his mind is swirling. And I'm sure he's thinking, what in the world is going on here? All these boys are ahead of me. I'm the youngest. I'm just the one who cares for the sheep. But he obeys his father, and he obeys God. Yes. Thought about Goliath, when God put it on his heart to take down that giant. Again, he's just a boy. But again, God puts it on his heart, and he says, with God's help, I'll do it, and he obeys. Thought about all the times in those years when Saul is after him, and he's throwing his spears at him, and he's attacking him, and he's going after him, and he wants him gone, and he wants him dead. And there were 2 times, I believe, in the story that he could have taken Saul's life, but he says, no, he says, I will not do it because God will not allow it. There were those times when he was going through his trials with his family and he's in battles, and before he makes any move, he stops and says, Lord, are you in this, Lord? If you're in it, I'll advance. Lord, if not, then I won't do it. Willing to do what the Lord would have him to do. Folks, I wonder sometimes if we think, well, yes, if God calls me into service, if He calls me into this, if He guides me to this, I wonder oftentimes if we hear that word obedience and we think of big things. We say, well, if God were to call me to preach, or if He were to use me in a certain area, then I would say yes, but on the other hand, you know what, I'm just going to wait until He does so. Now, folks, I believe with all my heart that God wants us to obey in little things first.
That's right.
Everyday battles that we have in our life, let me ask you tonight, are you obedient to God in the little areas of your life? Amen.
Help us.
Little voices. Hey, listen, folks, tonight, things like music and internet and television
Preach.
and friendships and all these things. And folks, we are fooling ourselves if we say, you know what, if God would call me to do this or that, then yes, I'll obey Him and follow Him, but I'm not really willing to obey Him and follow Him in the everyday areas of my life. Folks, I believe with all my heart that David was a kind of a person who was going to obey God in all of the little nitty-gritty areas of his life that were in his hands, that were at his grasp, that were tangible, everyday areas. I believe with all my heart that he called upon God on all things and said, God, are you in this or not?
Amen.
Obedience.
All right.
Turn it over to Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 18 and verse number 1 says the word which came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Arise and go down to the potter's house, and there I will cause you to hear my words. Then I went down to the potter's house, and behold, he wrought a work on the wheels. Who tonight has ever been to a pottery place? It is a very cool thing to see that in action. We had a man that came to our camp for a long time that taught in the public schools, and that was his thing. And he brought one time, and he taught one time on a session at camp. He had a potter's wheel, and he kicked it by hand, and he had a lump of clay. And while he was doing his pot, he just explained everything, and it was just so applicable. Let me ask you tonight: Are you clay? Are you clay in the master's hand? And he wrought a work on the wheels. In verse number 4, and the vessel that he made of clay was marred in the hand of the potter, just like we are tonight. So he made again another vessel, as seemed good to the potter to make it. Then the word of the Lord came to me, saying, O house of Israel, cannot I do with you this potter? Saith the Lord. Behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in my hand, O house of Israel. Skip on down, if you would, to verse number 10. He says there, if it do evil in my sight, that is to obey not my voice, then I will repent of the good, wherewith I said I would not benefit them. Clay. Let me ask you tonight, are you an adult? Am I an adult? Are you a teenager, a young person who is moldable, who is teachable, who is yielded? Teenagers, to the hands of your parents, who have to answer to God. Parents, to the hand of God, who we answer to. Are we obedient to God in the everyday areas of our life? David was. That's why God said he's a man after my own heart, because he will obey. He will obey and fail as he does, but he will obey all that I ask him to do. Thirdly, tonight, to put this down, this is kind of where I want to hone in.
tender-hearted. Turn, if you would, over to Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 21. I'm not going to ask tonight for a raise of hands, but who in here tonight is a sinner? All of us. Who in here tonight fails God every single day? Answer tonight, all of us do. Who in here tonight has ever sinned against the Lord? Answer tonight, all of us have. Because we are clay, we are human, we are filthy, rotten flesh. So when the Lord calls us out on it, how do we react? David fell into sin with Bathsheba when he should have been at war. Conceived a child. Again tonight, a man after God's own heart. Panicked. Called in her husband. Called up to the front lines and said, put her husband up there, Uriah. Put him up there to the front so he dies, so there's no controversy. No, send him back home. Send him back home so all this can be explained how she has a child. He comes back home. He will not go to see his wife. He lays at the king's door because he said, I won't go home because everyone else is at war and it's wrong with me. And so then he says, okay, send him out now to the front lines and have him killed. And so he has him murdered. He brushes his hands and says, you know what? It's all taken care of now. God sends a man along his way, Nathan the prophet. And of course, all of us have heard the story before. He tells us the story, and then David gets angry at Nathan. And then it's God's man who points a finger in his face and says those very stinging words. He says, thou art the man. David, of course, immediately begs God's forgiveness. God says, you're going to lose the son as payment for all that you've done. He falls upon his face and he fasts. I think it's for 7 days or so while his son's sick. His son dies. They come to him and say he's dead. And he says, I know. And they say, aren't you going to be angry? He says, no. He said, not going to be angry against the Lord when it's his doing. It's amazing his spirit that he has in all of this. The spirit that he has, his heart is broken. Then, of course, he pins down Psalm chapter 51, which is an amazing psalm. And he pens many others that we love to enjoy that are called David's penitent psalms. It's the psalms that he's written after he had a finger in his face about his sin and about how he humbles himself to God and how he begs God's grace and mercy on his life. Let me ask you tonight, how do you handle being called out when you've done wrong? It tells tonight if you're a man after God's own heart or not. Folks, I know more people than I can count tonight who are angry and bitter against God and church people because they would not humble themselves and have a broken heart over their sin, and they harden their neck. Proverbs 29, verse number 1, he that being often reproved hardeneth his neck shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. Turn us, if you would, over to 2 Samuel 12. Let me ask you tonight, teenagers, how do you handle instruction? How do you handle correction? How do you take
godly advice, godly instruction, wisdom. How'd you take that? I'm my own person. I'm my own man. I'm 13 years old. I know it all. I know more. I know way more than you. Dad and Mom know nothing. Why can't you just get on my back and leave me alone? I'll tell you tonight, you are headed for destruction. I'm 18 years old. I'm 19. I'm 20. I'm 21. Listen to me tonight, folks. I don't need to answer. I don't answer to nobody. Nobody answers to me. You're headed for destruction. David was the king of Israel. He could have said, kill him. But he was a man after God's own heart. And when he is confronted over his sin, he falls to his knees and says, Lord, forgive me. Notice, if you would, folks, I noticed this week for I think the first time that I have seen this in the story. 2 Samuel 12. And verse number 13, for thou didst it secretly, but he says here, but I will do this thing for all Israel and before the sun. And David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, the Lord also hath put away thy sin. Thou shalt not die. Of course, he talks about here how his son's going to die. And he spells it all out for him. Notice, if you would, in verse number 20. His son dies. Then David arose from the earth and washed and anointed himself and changed his apparel and came to the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he came to his own house, and when he required, they set bread before him, and he did eat. Skip on down to verse number 22, and it says here, the answer, he says here, and he said, while the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept. For I said, who can tell whether God will be gracious to me, that this child may live? But now he's dead. Notice, if you would, down to verse number 24 and 5. And I have never noticed this before. He goes and he comforts Bathsheba, conceives a child, and in verse number 25, I read this verse and I thought, wow, there's so much in this verse. Notice, so if you would, at the end of 24, he says, and the Lord loved him. And they called his name Solomon. And he sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet. And he called his name Jedediah, because of the Lord. Hey folks, picture with this scene. David's called out of his sin, called out for his sin by Nathan. He hits his knees, he repents. His child's killed. He comforts now his wife. They have a son, he calls his name Samuel. And I studied this out. This is from what I understand, this is the only time in Scripture this has ever happened. He calls for the man of God again. That same man who pointed his finger in his face and said, thou art the man. He calls for him when his son Solomon's born. And says, what should we call him? Nathan says, Jedediah, which, I wrote it down, means beloved of the Lord. And I saw that, and I called to my wife. I said, honey, I have never seen this before. I have never noticed this before. I said, the graciousness and the tenderheartedness of David. The very man who pointed his finger in his face and says, thou art the man. God's going to take this son from you. Some of us tonight would get very angry at God and hate Nathan. I'm never speaking to that Nathan again. You know what? I never even liked him in the first place. Yeah. How dare he come up to my castle? How dare he point his finger in my face? How dare he be the one who tells me that God's going to take my son? You know what? He's the reason why God took my son. I'll never speak to him again as long as I live. I can't stand that Nathan. Not David. He's so tender-hearted that he God gives him Solomon, and the first thing he does is says, hey, call the man of God. I told my wife, I said, wow, what a picture of graciousness. This very man who pointed out that the last one was going to die. And he calls him up and says, folks, I picture the whole scene, holding his hands. He says, so what should we call him? We've already called him Solomon. He hands him over to Nathan, and he says, you know what, I think you ought to call him Jedediah. He's beloved of the Lord. Graciousness, by the way, on both parties. I'm going to read tonight just a couple verses from Psalm chapter 51, and I'll be done. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness. According unto the multitude of thy tender mercies, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from mine iniquity, and cleanse me from my sins. For I acknowledge, first step, for I acknowledge my transgression, and my sin is ever before thee. Against thee and thee only have I sinned. Second step, done this evil in thy sight. Purge me. And 10 and 11 begs God for him to pull back his presence into his life. What an awesome psalm this is. Tender-hearted. If we are going to be a person tonight after God's own heart, a man after God's own heart, a woman after God's own heart, there has to be humility. I place myself under the omnipotent, almighty hand of God. There must be obedience. I'm willing to do whatever God would have me to do. I ask his opinion. I ask his will in the everyday tangible areas of my life. I am like clay in the potter's hands. And when sin is found in our life, we have to be tender-hearted about it and understand that it is us who did it. It is us who sinned against God and beg God's forgiveness and have a broken heart over our lack of a fellowship unto God. David, unperfect man, but David, a man after God's own heart. Folks, what an amazing testimony that is. That 3 times in Scripture, God says, you know what? There was a man down there who was far from perfect. But 3 times, both testaments, he was a man after my own heart. He was a man after my own heart. Let me ask you tonight, are you? Am I? We can be. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. Obedience in the everyday areas of life. Following the Lord and his leading in everyday areas of our life. In small things. And then God guides into bigger things. But it starts in the small areas of our life. Are we willing to obey in these small areas? And are we tender-hearted when the Lord points out our sin to us? Folks, I'll say tonight, this is the hardest one, I believe, in our day and age in which we live, is to have a broken heart over our sin. It's my pen, it's my sin, it's my life. It's not. There are very few Christians who, when they are confronted with their sin, that they hit their knees and say, Lord, I'm sorry. Hey folks, our time right now in which we live, we are so quick to point out, it's his fault, it's her fault, it's their fault, it's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault. They pushed me, I did all that. Hey, there are very few believers who say, I did it. There are very few who say, against thee and thee only have I sinned and done this in thy sight. Lord, I'm so sorry. Create in me a new heart again, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Tender-hearted towards the will of God, or stiff-necked. Do a study sometimes in Proverbs alone on that word stiff-necked. Bad things happen to them, by the way. God destroys them. But God is always has his ear bent to those who have a tender heart towards him. Our Father, tonight, every matter right close. As we hold us down, I'm going to ask our pianist to come. Please, if you would. I feel led to have an invitation tonight, and I just want to ask us tonight if we are as close to God as we ought to be. Humility, obedience, tenderheartedness. I wonder tonight, as our pianist plays, just a quick song of invitation. If the Lord tonight has spoken to your heart in any of these areas, would you come down to the altar tonight? Talk to God. Would you come as you place? If the Lord spoke to your heart, would you come tonight?